A humble waitress was fired for an act of compassion that no one expected. She offered food to someone on the streets during a freezing night in Phoenix, Arizona. Her boss didn't hesitate to fire her in front of all the customers. But what happened in the next 24 hours transformed not only her life, but the entire community around her. Luxury vehicles began appearing out of nowhere, parking in front of the small establishment that had rejected her. People whispered on street corners. Someone important was about to reveal a truth that no one could imagine. And it all began with a hot plate of food served without judgment. Before we continue with this story that will move you, we want to extend a special invitation. If you believe that kindness still makes a difference in the world, leave your like now and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share more real stories that touch the heart and make us believe in humanity again. Now let's dive into this incredible journey. There are places that seem to freeze in time when the early morning approaches. The small restaurant on the outskirts of Phoenix was exactly like that. The kind of establishment with a chrome counter worn down by time, swivel stools that creaked with the slightest movement, and an old bell hanging on the door that produced a metallic sound every time someone entered. The aroma of strong, almost bitter coffee constantly hung in the air, mixed with the smell of fried bacon and buttered toast. Margaret Sullivan had worked there for more than a decade. Her knees ached at the end of each shift. Her calloused hands carried heavy trays with a precision that only years of experience can bring. She was 52 years old, gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, and a tired but genuine smile that calmed even the most stressed customers. People didn't come just for the mediocre food and affordable prices. They came for her, for the way she made each person feel seen, important, human. Margaret had a special way of caring for people without them noticing. When she folded napkins with extra attention, when she warmed plates before serving so the food wouldn't cool too quickly, when customers left tiny piles of coins as tips, she discreetly slid that money to Tyler, the young man who washed dishes in the back and supported his sick mother alone. When a frightened teenager came in shivering with cold and no money in her pocket, Margaret invented that someone had paid in advance for a soup and placed the hot plate in front of her without asking questions. There were no motivational speeches, just a silent nod of the head and an atmosphere of respect that allowed hungry people to breathe without shame. The owner of the establishment, Gerald Baxter, ran the business as if he were managing numbers on a cold, soulless spreadsheet. He watched Margaret with the same coldness that winter watches a fragile window about to crack. He called her too soft, within earshot of customers, as if kindness were weakness. He deducted from her salary for slices of pie that she offered to lonely elderly people. He made a point of humiliating her in small daily doses. The employees noticed. The cook muttered once that words like kindness and compassion never fit in Gerald's mouth. Outside, the harsh February winter pressed its weight against the fogged windows of the restaurant. The biting air bit throats, caused dry coughs, froze tears before they even fell. Margaret rubbed her swollen knee and kept moving through the hall. Refill the coffee. Check table 5. Gently squeeze the shoulder of the widow, who always chose only toast with butter because it was all that fit in her tight budget. The environment maintained its own rhythm, almost musical. Plates landed on the counter with dry sounds. Coffee rose in perfumed spirals of steam. An old record player played forgotten songs from the 70s. Margaret frequently cast glances at the back door, the one that always jammed with the intense cold. An unconscious habit. Pull, push, check. People gossiped about the side parking lot, especially about the dark corner near the rusty dumpsters. The week before, a customer swore she saw a dark sedan parked there after midnight with the headlights off. Another heard dragging footsteps scraping against the rough bricks of the side wall. It could be nothing. It could be the beginning of something no one expected. Margaret separated her tips at the end of the shift and always set $3 aside. Food for the man who appeared regularly without having enough courage to ask for help directly. It seemed like a small gesture, like lighting a single candle in a room where the main lamp flickered, threatening to go out. Small, but defiant against the darkness. When closing time arrived, thin layers of ice crept across the outer edges of the glass like delicate and cruel lace. Margaret touched the frozen surface with 2 fingers, like someone making a silent promise. If you were beside her at that exact moment, she would probably whisper softly, "Keep an eye on that door. It's not time yet, but it will be soon." On that specific night, the restaurant seemed strangely silent, as if holding its breath before something important happened. The doorbell produced a thin, almost ghostly sound. A current of cold air infiltrated under the back door and wrapped around Margaret's ankles like invisible, icy fingers. She turned toward the kitchen, but stopped abruptly in the middle of the movement. A silhouette was moving in the side alley. Someone was standing near the metal dumpsters, shoulders curved inward, trembling violently, the kind of tremor that transforms solid bones into fragile glass about to shatter. Margaret reached for her worn coat hanging on the hook and steadied her breath that was beginning to accelerate. She checked the security camera that never pointed at the right angle anyway. She slid a plate under the kitchen's heat lamp, feeling the warmth rise and touch her tired face. Homemade meatloaf, still steaming mashed potatoes, peas on the side. She poured a second cup of coffee, dark and dense like secrets kept for years. She cast a quick glance at the lights still on in Gerald's office upstairs. The bell tinkled again, softly. Margaret unlocked the lock carefully, felt the cold bite her exposed wrist, and went out into the freezing night. The cold hit her cheeks like a slap. The man blinked his red, watery eyes toward her, flooded with a shame that weighed more than any wet coat. The smell coming from him was a mixture of soaked cardboard, old cigarette smoke, and accumulated despair. Margaret gently held the tattered sleeve of his coat and guided him inside the warm establishment. The bell announced their entrance. The warmth of the kitchen spread over both of them like an embrace, relieving the violent tremor that shook the man's thin body. She seated him in the corner booth, near the old heater that made noise but worked perfectly. She placed her own coat over his trembling shoulders, slid the steaming plate forward, placed the fork in his frozen hand. The man began eating in tiny, hesitant bites, then began to really eat, like someone who doesn't know when the next meal will be. The steam fogged the crooked glasses he wore. The hot coffee began to stabilize his trembling hands. Margaret kept her movements small and discreet, almost invisible. She folded another napkin, turned a framed photograph on the wall, transformed the rescue into common routine, as if feeding hungry people were the establishment's standard operating procedure. The cook raised an eyebrow in silent approval. Tyler, the young man who washed dishes, looked nervously at the boss's office door and shook his head with concern. 2 regular customers murmured to each other that the world had become too cruel. An elementary school teacher correcting tests at the counter said loudly enough to be heard, "Kindness costs less than a cup of regular coffee." The light in the upstairs office suddenly turned on, projecting a yellow rectangle on the stairs. Gerald Baxter descended the steps with heavy footsteps. He saw the extra coat. He saw the man eating, his jaw visibly contracted. He crossed the ceramic floor in 3 long, noisy strides that echoed like a judge's sentence. "Who the hell is this?" he asked with a cutting voice. Margaret kept her voice tone balanced and calm. Someone who needed a safe place to sit for a few minutes. Gerald leaned over the booth until his cheap tie brushed the edge of the still hot plate. "This here isn't a charity shelter." Margaret placed her palm beside the plate, creating a symbolic barrier. "He's freezing out there. He'll finish his meal and then be on his way." Gerald let out a harsh laugh without any trace of genuine humor. "On whose tab exactly?" He waved at the metal holder where the receipts were. "We're not a charity institution run by nuns." The teacher closed her notebook with a dry snap. The truck driver at seat number 5 muttered that excessive rules can suffocate any place to death. Gerald straightened his posture, puffing out his chest. "Get him out of here now." The man trembled and tried to stand up unsteadily. Margaret held his wrist firmly but gently. "He finishes eating first." Her voice didn't rise in volume, didn't tremble, didn't beg. Gerald took a step closer, invading her personal space. "Do you work here or not?" He reached out to grab the plate as if confiscating evidence of a crime. Margaret moved the plate to the side, receiving the hot steam over her calloused knuckles. Gerald turned to face the rest of the customers present in the hall. "Everyone pays here. No exceptions, no special cases." He wanted agreement, approval, Validation of his cruelty disguised as business policy. Embarrassed silence responded. Tyler watched the floor as if counting the cracks in the ceramic. Margaret placed her tip jar on the counter. Coins clinked. Then take from here. Mark the meal as paid. Gerald stared at the jar as if it were a personal insult, an affront to his imaginary authority. You're fired. He made sure everyone clearly heard each syllable. Margaret's breathing slowed. She untied her apron with slow and deliberate movements, folded it twice with the edges perfectly aligned in a final gesture of dignity. She placed it on the counter beside the register. The old man whispered that he would leave, that he didn't want to cause trouble for anyone. She touched his shoulder gently. Finish your food. Gerald expected a dramatic scene. Tears, pleas, public humiliation. Denise offered none of those things. She grabbed the old sweater she kept for long night shifts, checked that her small coin purse was secure, and calmly put everything away. She walked through the hall past the window covered with white ice and paused before the old bell. It tinkled one last time, like a farewell. Outside, the cold had become even sharper, almost cutting. The parking lot smelled of frozen metal and road salt. Her fingers trembled as she buttoned her thin coat. Inside the restaurant, the heater continued humming. The man finished his meal in careful, respectful forkfuls. The news reached her still on the sidewalk. A text message from the cook said simply, "I'm sorry about what happened." Another from a regular customer mentioned that the place seemed smaller, emptier, without her there. Margaret put the phone in her pocket and continued walking through the deserted streets of Phoenix. That night, she sat at the tiny kitchen table in her apartment with a cup of tea that cooled without her taking a single sip. The wall clock ticked in monotonous rhythm. She mentally replayed the scene of Gerald reaching for the plate, feeling again the heat on her skin, the public humiliation, the certainty that she had done the only thing her conscience allowed. Before sleeping, she prepared a small backpack. She placed the folded apron on top of the other things, like someone storing a war memento. The morning arrived pale and unenthusiastic. Margaret left the cheap apartment building where she lived and stopped abruptly on the entrance steps. A black, gleaming SUV was parked along the curb. Completely darkened windows, engine running, exhaling steam in the cold morning air. The driver was turned in the direction of the restaurant 3 blocks away. Another identical SUV turned the corner in slow motion and parked silently behind the first. Margaret slowed her walk, gripping the rusty railing as if it could offer some explanation for that surreal vision. 2 immaculate luxury vehicles with mirrored windows, an alien apparition against the peeling paint and the crooked, extinguished neon of the restaurant. For a second, she thought that maybe it was some problem, some health inspection, maybe even the kind of investigation that closes establishments permanently. She crossed the street carefully, avoiding treacherous ice patches on the cracked asphalt. The restaurant looked different under the harsh daylight, less welcoming, more fragile and vulnerable. Inside, silhouettes moved behind the fogged glass, men wearing tailored overcoats, holding metal clipboards, conversing in low, serious tones. A silent tension vibrated in the air like a stretched wire about to break. She didn't enter. Not yet. She stood watching from the sidewalk, hands buried deep in her coat pockets, breath rising in white clouds like cigarette smoke. The regular customers were outside the hardware store on the other side of the street, whispering to each other in small, nervous groups. "I bet the owner finally sold the place," said one of them. "Or was caught evading federal taxes," murmured another, with the air of someone who knows the city's secrets. "Who's that woman standing there alone? Is that Margaret? I heard she was fired last night in front of everyone." She heard the comments, but pretended she didn't. When the black SUVs finally departed silently, they left behind a strange and heavy silence, loaded with expectation, that followed her all the way back home. Her apartment smelled faintly of cheap soap and accumulated loneliness. The walls still carried the persistent aroma of bacon grease from the restaurant that permeated her uniforms, even after multiple washings. She sat on the edge of the worn sofa, hands clasped tightly. The phone remained silent and motionless. No apology, no offer of rehiring, not even a call to collect the last paycheck they owed her. She filled the day with small, automatic movements, washing cups that were already clean, folding towels that were already folded, cleaning the same kitchen counter 3 consecutive times, scrubbing invisible circles. The weight of habit pressed heavier than the weight of actual loss. At nightfall, she took a walk past the market where she bought bruised fruit on discount days, past the church steps where volunteers distributed blankets once a week. On the corner near the restaurant, she stopped again, unable to resist curiosity. Inside, Gerald was alone behind the counter, head bent down, phone pressed against his ear. He didn't look victorious. He looked disturbed, restless, even frightened. A black SUV glided down the street again, slower this time, as if observing, watching, waiting. Gerald turned toward the window, face pale under the artificial fluorescent glow. Margaret retreated into the shadow, invisible. The next morning, a letter was slipped under her door. No sender, just her name written by hand in elegant calligraphy. Miss Sullivan. Inside, a short message written in permanent blue ink. Please come to the restaurant at 10 a.m. You are needed. She frowned, confused. Needed? It didn't say for what, didn't explain by whom, didn't offer any context. The walk seemed longer that day. Each step stirred dozens of possibilities in her tired mind. When she arrived at the restaurant, the first thing she noticed was the different smell. Fresh paint mixed with coffee that wasn't burned. The windows gleamed clean, without the accumulated grease stains of years. The old hanging restaurant sign had been completely removed. A blank white sign waited in its place, with wires still hanging loose. Through the crystal-clear glass, she saw workers installing something new inside. The counter seemed reorganized, somehow more illuminated. Modern LED lights replaced the old flickering fluorescence. Her heart gave an uneven leap inside her tight chest. "Margaret Sullivan?" a voice asked politely. A man wearing a dark wool overcoat of expensive quality approached, smiling with professional politeness. "They're waiting for you inside." He opened the door for her with a chivalrous gesture. Inside, the air seemed different. Lighter, cleaner, more welcoming, and at the far end of the counter stood the man she had fed. The same fragile stranger who had trembled near the rusty dumpsters on that cold night. Except now he wasn't fragile. His back was straight and firm. The suit he wore was impeccable, of obvious Italian tailoring. A silver watch gleamed on his left wrist, reflecting the new light. He turned toward her, a small, knowing smile forming even before he pronounced a single word. Margaret froze mid-step. Her breath caught in her throat, because sometimes life doesn't announce the moment when everything changes. It just stands there waiting for you to recognize it. For a heartbeat suspended in time, Margaret forgot how to breathe. The man she had wrapped in her old worn coat, the one who could barely hold a fork with trembling hands, now stood taller than the very environment around him. His posture, his unshakable calm, his commanding presence. Everything seemed unreal, impossible, like a movie scene that didn't belong to her real life. He took slow steps toward her, studying her face with a gentleness that completely disarmed her. "Miss Sullivan," he finally said, voice balanced and deep like a well-tuned musical instrument. "You remember me, don't you?" She nodded affirmatively, still unsure if words would come out correctly from her dry mouth. Around them, workers paused their tasks, pretending not to be watching every second of the interaction. Someone whispered near the old cash register. "It's her. It's the waitress he talked about." The man smiled slightly, a small smile but loaded with meaning. "I owe you much more than just a meal." He began to explain everything patiently, filling in gaps she didn't even know existed. How he had been traveling under a different name, taking a quiet road trip after selling his technology company in Seattle, for an amount she couldn't even process mentally. He had been robbed 2 cities south, in Tucson, left with absolutely nothing but the tattered clothes he wore. On that specific night, when he stumbled unsteadily near the restaurant, he wasn't looking for food, just for basic human warmth, for a moment of dignity, for proof that he was still visible to the world. "Everyone walked right past me on that street," he said, eyes moving briefly to the window, as if reliving the painful memory. "Except you. You stopped. You cared." Margaret's hands trembled against the old purse she held. She wasn't used to gratitude dressed in Italian silk, pronounced by someone who clearly had real power in the world. He turned toward Gerald, who had just entered from the kitchen, face completely drained of color and life. "You must be the manager," Gerald stuttered, trying to regain some control over the situation that clearly exceeded him. But the man raised a firm hand, interrupting any attempt at conversation. "I am the new owner now. I bought this establishment yesterday afternoon." His tone carried no anger or revenge, just quiet and absolute authority, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard and obeyed without question. He looked back at Margaret, maintaining direct eye contact. "You gave without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return, without calculating future benefits. That kind of heart shouldn't answer to gratuitous cruelty." Gerald tried to speak, open his mouth to defend himself or justify, but the man simply said with final firmness, "Your employment here ended today." Then, softer, almost educational, "Consider this your most important lesson about humanity." The silence that followed was electric, charged, almost palpable. You could hear the low hum of the industrial refrigerator, the hiss of the coffee pot in the machine, even the wall clock counting seconds like drops of water falling. Then he reached inside an expensive leather folder and handed Margaret a set of stapled official documents. Her name was printed at the top in thick black letters. Title transfer, Sullivan Holdings LLC. Margaret blinked repeatedly, reading each word twice, 3 times, afraid that the letters might disappear if she blinked too quickly. He gestured toward the window where the signage team was raising a new sign in place. The letters caught the morning sunlight, bright and new and impossible. "Margaret's Restaurant? A safe place for everyone." Gasps and muffled exclamations rippled through the small crowd of employees and morning customers. The cook covered his mouth with both hands. Tyler, the young dishwasher, let out a low laugh, half disbelief, half pure and uncontrolled joy. The billionaire looked at her one last time, eyes soft but determined. "You kept me alive that night when I had lost all hope," he said with a voice loaded with contained emotion. "Now I want this place to do the same for other people. Let it be refuge, not business. Let it be home, not just a restaurant." Her throat tightened painfully. She tried to thank him, but her voice came out only as a hoarse and broken whisper. "Why me? Why do all this for someone like me?" He smiled, eyes soft like someone who finally found the answer to an old question. "Because kindness deserves a stage, not a hidden corner. Because goodness should be rewarded with a megaphone, not with dismissal. Because the world needs more people like you in charge, making decisions, showing how it's done." And then, just as he arrived, he was gone. He left through the door into the clear morning light, escorted by the silent purr of those same black SUVs that now made complete sense. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. Margaret stood still, the papers trembling in her hands, the reflection of the new neon playing on her cheeks, marked by tears of relief and disbelief. Sometimes life doesn't reward you with dramatic applause or inspiring background music, just with respectful silence and a chance to start over the right way. On that day, Margaret opened the restaurant doors again, this time not as an employee who obeys orders, but as an owner who sets the tone. And for the first time in countless years, the smell of strong coffee made her genuinely smile. The weeks that followed seemed to be born from the sun after a long and violent storm. The new sign outside gleamed under the morning light of Phoenix. Margaret's Restaurant, a safe place for everyone. The same old bell still tinkled when the door opened, but now it sang a little louder, a little prouder, as if it too felt the change in the air. Margaret moved more slowly in these new days. Her joints still remembered that time kept counting, that years of hard work leave permanent marks. But her steps carried a new weight now. It wasn't exhaustion. It was defined purpose, clear intention, recovered dignity. The regular customers returned first, bringing accumulated stories and laughter that filled the air like the aroma of warm cookies fresh from the oven. Then came the strangers, entire families traveling from other cities after hearing about it, war veterans who slept in temporary shelters, teenagers who had spent nights under highway bridges. No one left hungry. That was the new fundamental principle, the unbreakable rule. She had kept the same corner booth where it all began on that transformative night. That seat, she declared with respectful firmness, was always reserved, a permanent symbol, a physical reminder. Sometimes she found a folded note there in the morning, handwritten thank you letters with trembling handwriting, a $5 bill from someone who had just gotten back on track, or a colorful drawing from a child who called her Aunt Maggie in crooked and adorable letters. The words spread beyond the city's borders, rippling outward like circles in still water. The restaurant became a story that people told on local radio, whispered in church corridors on Sundays, shared online by people who still believed that kindness wasn't extinct from the modern and cynical world. When the black SUVs reappeared on a sunny Sunday morning, no one panicked this time. They parked silently, almost respectfully, like someone paying homage in a sacred cemetery. A man got out of the central vehicle, older now, without the sharp and intimidating suit, just a soft wool sweater and a small polished wooden box in his hands. Inside the box was a bronze plaque engraved with elegant letters. To the woman who fed me when I was invisible, your kindness saved more than a body, it saved a soul. He humbly asked that it be hung near the main entrance. Margaret smiled through tears that she finally allowed to fall without shame, and nodded affirmatively with deep gratitude. At nightfall, the restaurant's lights projected a soft golden glow across the busy Phoenix street. Inside, plates clinked in domestic harmony. A modern jukebox played songs that people of all ages appreciated, and Margaret's laughter rolled through the air like literal, tangible warmth that heated more than any electric heater ever could. Before locking the doors after the last satisfied customer left, she stood outside under her own neon-lit name, the glow touching her tired but fulfilled face. For the first time in her entire life, she didn't feel small, invisible, disposable. She felt seen, valued, important. And if you paid enough attention, over the sound of the cold night wind brushing the swinging sign, you could almost hear her whisper what had become the restaurant's silent creed, repeated by employees and customers like a daily prayer. Kindness always finds its way home. Always. If this story touched your heart in any way, remember a fundamental truth. A single small act of compassion can rewrite an entire life and transform entire communities. Share this video so more people see that kindness still wins in the end, that doing the right thing still matters, that humanity isn't lost. And if you believe the world desperately needs more moments like Margaret's, more people willing to risk everything for strangers, hit the subscribe button right now. Because every story here exists to remind us that kindness always finds its way back home.